Hello, everyone. My name is David Aoyama, and this is my TOK Exhibition. My knowledge question is, are some types of knowledge less open to interpretation than others? So here we'll get into it. So my first object is titled My Wife and Mother-in-Law by William L. Hill. He is a British cartoonist, and this was drawn in 1888. And if you can't tell already, this is an optical illusion. This painting was originally drawn on a postcard, but it was later published into a magazine, and that's how it got famous. The viewer is able to see two figures in this picture, a young woman and an older lady. And this is called a gestalt shift. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But this is basically when you can shift by shifting your perspective, you see a different image. So if you can't see it already, I think the most notable one is seeing the wife or the younger woman. If you can see my mouse, I'm not sure, but this thing right here that either looks like an eye or an ear, if you see it as ear and then you see this line as her chin, that basically is the younger woman, versus if you see that line as her nose and that ear as her eye, and then this line down here by the younger woman's neck as the mouth, you see it as like an older lady person. So those are the two things that you can see. So based on this, I chose this object to fit in this exhibition because it is an example of art, which is an area of knowledge. Art, I think, is often described as a universal language just because anyone can look at a piece of art and understand it. It's not like a language where you have to understand it and there are certain barriers. And you can express anything through art, which is why it is also universal language. And based on your own perspective of a piece of art, you can gain your own opinion and you can understand anything from it. So as an optical illusion, this picture allows the reader to, or the viewer, I guess, to interpret it in their own way. So based on this painting, again, you can see the two ladies. So the one thing about this optical illusion is that it restricts the viewer from seeing two different objects. So in that sense, it is less open to interpretation. However, it is super open to interpretation as the viewer can see whatever they want from this painting. So in terms of optical illusions, they are more open to interpretation to the viewer because it's based on your own perspective. My next TOK object is this book called Introduction to Algebra by Richard Ruziek. I'm not super sure how to say that. If you can't tell already, it is a math textbook. And this guy, Richard, he was a former USA Math Olympiad winner in 2007. And this book was written in 2007. But that gives him his ethos and his credibility for writing this book. So, a reader would know that this book is viable and it's good. So this basically gives the basic explanation of algebra and helps young math students get into it. So I chose this math textbook because I actually use this specific textbook to learn algebra and math. Going into it, I was very confused, but this book explained it to me very well. One thing is math is also an area of knowledge, but math is heavily based on facts rather than reason. Math concepts are made possible and consistent since they're based on a thing called axioms. Axioms are universally accepted constants. So similar to how art is a universal language, axioms are universal, right? Everyone knows that a one is a one and a one plus two is three, right? That's the same. And that goes for algebra as well. And these axioms are never changing. Additionally, this makes math less open to interpretation because it's very structured. You know that however you get there, that endpoint is the same if you get the question right. But the one thing that is more open to interpretation is methodology. So Richard Ruziek, in this book, he gives his own opinion and his own interpretation of the math and explains that as a methodology that we as new math people are able to use and they can help us learn. So in that form, it's open to interpretation to him because he's explaining it to us. However, it is less open to our interpretation as we're reading it. But again, him telling us this doesn't mean that we have to use it. So again, using this book allows us to interpret math in our own way and problem solve it in our own way that best fits ourselves. So in a sense, Math itself, with the concepts and the numbers, is not very open to interpretation. But books like this and the methodology that goes into math is more open to interpretation because it's your own way of solving it and going through this area of knowledge. Lastly, I have a poem by Li Bai. So this poem obviously is in Chinese, and this was written in the 17th century by a Tang Dynasty poet. This poem is only 4 lines, and the English translation of the name is "Quiet Night Thought." So it is translated as "Moonlight in front of the bed. I suspect there is frost on the ground. Look up at the moon, bow your head, and think about your hometown." In Chinese is 起头望明月，低头no 床是 whatever. I forgot it. Sorry, my Chinese is not that good. However, if you can kind of see, uh, it's basically about the meaning of this is basically when it's the holiday season, the snow on the ground, you look up at the sky and you start reminiscing about your hometown, and because at that time people would normally go back. So in this form, we're looking at a language, and again, poem is also a poem being part of literature is also an area of knowledge. But this is brought even further by being in Chinese, so it adds another layer. So because of this language barrier, it is harder to communicate with others. And also with language, certain words have different meanings, and based on their placements, they mean different things versus in English. So it's based on the person, as a Chinese person or a person who speaks Mandarin in this case. But reading it, they would interpret it differently than how a person in America would, based on even the American translation, because it's not 100% perfect. So in that sense, this is very open to interpretation. Additionally, this being a poem, the poet has his own thoughts. The poet is writing about nostalgia about his hometown. As a reader, you might read this and think it's about the winter time because it's talking about snow on the ground. Um, but again, that's based on yourself, and that's only if you can read this. Again, translated into English, it's a little bit differently. So at this point, this poem itself, especially poems in general, even if they're in a different language, they are super, super open to interpretation. Especially with poems, although the author has his own purpose for writing it, you as the reader might get a new meaning, a different meaning out of it. And the poet himself or herself, in this case, it's a dude, he wants you to get your own meaning out of it as well. So poems, being this form, being a literature area of knowledge, is very open to interpretation. Thank you, and that is my TOK exhibition.